Today we're going to be talking about measuring angles. So yesterday we talked about the three types of angles. We know acute angles are tiny and small, right angles make an L, and obtuse angles are angles that are open wide. The tool we use to measure angles is called a protractor. This is what a protractor looks like. So let's talk about the numbers on this protractor. So on one end, the protractor starts at 0 and it goes all the way to 180. And if you notice on the inside of the half circle, it also starts at 0 on the opposite end and goes to 180. It can help us get an exact measurement on an angle. Now here is how this works. You always line up one ray with the 0 on the protractor. So this is the ray of the angle that we lined up with the 0. Then you take a look at the other ray and figure out where it's pointing. When you look at an angle, you want to first determine, all right, is this angle more than 90? Does it look like it is larger than an L? So we use our L kind of as our base. Or does it look like it's smaller? So if I take a look at this angle, I know that this angle is larger than an L, just a tiny bit. So I know that when I measure it, it's going to be greater than 90. So when I'm looking at the numbers, whichever number that is pointing to that's greater than 90, that's how I'm going to figure out the measurement. Now this protractor counts by fives, and it helps us out a little bit because every 10 is there. So we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 95. So the measure of this angle would be 95. The way we write degrees is just like you do with temperature. If you've ever seen a temperature on a thermometer or on the news, you've noticed they put this little circle above it. That circle stands for degrees. So the measure of this angle is 95 degrees. Let's take a look at the next angle. So if you'll notice, this angle is pointing the opposite direction. So our protractor is pointing the opposite direction, but the same rules apply. Always make sure you line up one of the rays with 0. Then the other one's the one that you're using to measure. Then I'm going to look at it. Okay, is this bigger than an L? Do my L backwards. Or is it equal to an L? Or is it a little bit smaller than an L? So if I look at this one is just a tiny bit, I'm going to say it's a tiny bit. Actually, it looks like it's almost exactly on the line of 90. So what I'm going to say is it looks just like an L. So this would be a right angle. It would equal exactly 90 degrees. We are going to look at two more angles just to make sure. And these two angles, one is obtuse and one is acute, because this is where it can get a little bit tricky. All right, so I take a look at my angle. I match up one of the rays with 0. That one's matched up perfectly. Then I look at where the other one is pointing. So I know that this angle is open very wide, nice and wide. So I know that this angle has to be obtuse. But when I look over at where it's pointing, if I'm not very careful, I might say that this angle is 15 degrees. This angle would not be 15 degrees because it is an obtuse angle, and we know that obtuse angles have to be greater than 90 degrees. So instead of looking at the outside of the protractor, I'm going to be using the inside. So if I take a look, it's counting by tens. This ray is in between 160 and 170. So if I was counting by fives, I'm going to start at 100. I have 100. 105, 110, 115, 120, 125, 130, 135, 140, 145, 150, 155, 160, 165 degrees. So this would not be a little tiny 15-degree angle. It would be a 165-degree angle. So it helps if you determine if the angle is obtuse or acute first. That way you don't make that mistake of choosing 15. Same thing with this one, except for it is an acute angle. If you take a look at it, you can tell that it's less than 90 degrees. So I'm going to go ahead and label acute. Make sure that my line is matched up with 0 because sometimes it's not, and we'll talk about those, but in this case it is. And then I need to figure out how many degrees it is. I'm not going to look at the inside because that is too large. Those are for obtuse angles. So I'm looking at the outside. I have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55. This angle is 55 degrees. So that is how you use a protractor to measure angles. It's really important to label your angle with acute, obtuse, or right first. That makes it a lot easier to determine what the correct measurement is. We'll be doing more practice with these, and they're not that difficult. They're pretty easy.